I'm making this video as an introduction or an accompaniment to an essay that I'm publishing on my website that has to do with capitalization and budgeting requirements in an idealistic plaintiff side practice. And the reason I wrote this essay is because I have been looking for years to find information about these basic subjects and how they apply to operating a plaintiff side practice. And my impression is that the information that's out there in the world is pretty slender or pretty slight in a way that's kind of surprising because it's not that there aren't discussions of the business of law. There are. It's just that those discussions that are readily accessible and are put out by like organizations of plaintiff side attorneys tend to be very heavily skewed toward, frankly, the motives of the people who are willing to present on those subjects, which means they are uh, sort of like advertising for particular products in general. And there's a lot of emphasis on how to market through social media, how to reach consumers various ways. There's a lot of emphasis on case management software. There's emphasis on AI. There's emphasis on, shared office space. There's emphasis on everything around the basic question of how does the business work? How much money do you need to make it operate? How much money are you going to generate? The business, that part, is what doesn't seem to get discussed in these discussions of the business of law. And that mattered to me because I was pivoting from doing post conviction work toward an emphasis more on civil rights. And I was trying to think about, well, how could one do this? And I looked for lots of models. There's three sources of information that I found that were relatively useful. One of them was this book by a guy named Professor Kritzer, which I'll link in the description, or I'll put the name of it. The book is called Risks, Reputations, and Rewards, and it's about portfolios of cases in plaintiff side practice. Another source of information that was pretty useful was the writing of Professor Margot Schlanger, who has written about the economics or the economic structures and incentives and disincentives in prison litigation. And then there's a podcast by a guy named Pratik Shah, and he's an attorney here in Southern California. And the podcast is called From Solo to Scale. And it's a very good discussion of the capital challenges that occur in starting up a practice. Although even that podcast is a little general and doesn't necessarily get down all the way to specific examples of dollar figures. Why not talk about money? I understand why people don't want to talk about money. In some ways, it's like putting your cards on the table. And, this is a competitive field. Plaintiffs are fighting against defense counsel who are very well capitalized. And so the more you talk about capital challenges of doing plaintiff side work, the more you're sort of showing your soft underbelly and making it apparent to opposing counsel that, it's actually challenging for you, which, will perhaps encourage them to turn the screws on you. But I don't give a shit, honestly. I don't give a shit because the whole shtick, I think, and what's going on in this practice is asymmetric warfare. And I'm going to be asymmetric until the day I die. And so I don't care about playing that, attempt to be a big thing if I'm small. I'm small and I'm nimble, and that's just the way I'm going to be. And there are advantages to that there might not be if I were a 50-person firm. So let it be. Meanwhile, I'm going to talk about numbers. And so this is the introduction to this discussion. And I hope it'll be helpful to some other people out there who maybe also have some of the same questions. Like how does this work really? Do you have to have $100,000 sitting in the bank really to do this type of practice, or can you do it on a credit card, almost like as if you were an indie filmmaker or an independent band or something like that? Is it that kind of thing? And the answer that I came up with from looking at this as well is yes and no. It's kind of complicated. So that's the subject of future videos. But this is just to explain that I'm making this stuff because I think it's an interesting question and it's a totally under discussed area given how important the question of the business realities actually is. There just isn't that much information about it out there. And so that's the gap I'm trying to fill. I hope you find it interesting.